This episode is brought to you by the great people over at HR Easily. I mean, I think they're great. I've never met them, but I hear they're the reason I'm paid on time at work, so they've got to be at least kinda great. Anyway, check them out at hreasily.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of Startup Snapshot, a Tech in Asia podcast where we're talking to the leaders among innovators in the Asian startup scene about their founder journeys, their highest and lowest moments, and how they've overcome the challenges they've faced along the way. My name's Nat, and today we've got a very special guest, Roshni Mahtani, founder and CEO of online publisher Tickled Media. Thanks for joining me, Roshni.
Thanks for having me. It's such a great pleasure to be sitting here with you.
Yeah, and thanks for coming to our brand new office. So getting right into it, can you tell me a little bit about how you founded Tickled Media? It started with theAsianparent, right?
That's right. So theAsianparent is our main brand and what we mostly focus on. So I started theAsianparent when I was a 25-year-old girl living in New York. And I remember I was sitting there on the steps of the South Street Seaport. And I was with a couple of friends and I talked about, hey, I want to start a company and I don't want to work for someone and I want to do something cool with my life. And my background is journalism. So it was very natural that I would want to do something to do with content. And, I had two ideas at that point. So one was to start a parenting website, which was focused on Asian parents and the Asian philosophy, because over the weekend I used to babysit, and every time I would have troubles and issues with little girls that I was babysitting,
Right.
I would go online and I would search for certain things and I would never find the information, such as, can you feed your baby durian? And can you feed your child paneer or chapati? And I didn't know the answers to this. And then, of course, every time we would have power struggles or disciplinarian methods, and I would go online and I would read the Western parenting site, and it would be so different from what any Asian parent would do. So I saw a market gap with regards to it. So I gave them a couple of ideas and everyone voted for theAsianparent. And so I decided to start blogging about it and my experiences babysitting and my experiences with the Asian parenting philosophy. And it suddenly took off.
Right. And at this point, you were kind of focused on Asian parents living in America, or was it just Asian parents around the world?
So, after living in the US, let me just back step one point. So I'm a Singaporean, but growing up in Singapore, I never ever felt that I was really Singaporean. So I think it was that whole, what is a Singaporean? Who is a Singaporean? Because you could be Malay, Chinese, Indian, and you're so different from each other, and yet you're still so similar, but our country is so young. So, I used to struggle with what's an identity of a Singaporean.
Right.
And so when I moved to New York, I was excited because I was like, oh, great, I'm going to go into the melting pot. I'm going to meet all these cultures and I'm going to be a New Yorker. But when I reached New York, I was like, oh my God, I am so not an American and I'm not a New Yorker. I'm an Asian girl. I'm a Singaporean. So the reason I'm sharing that is because I think that for a lot of Asians living around the world, whether you're Chinese or you're Indian or you're Malay or any of the other races that make up Asia, I think we're a lot more similar, and our heritage is who we are more than, what citizenship we have.
Right. Right. Okay. So that kind of led you to start this platform that gave Asian women, Asian parents, right, entirely an identity because they could find specific questions answered on your site. Like you mentioned, whether you can feed a toddler durian. Was this really something that was unique to Asians and not to the rest of the world's demographic?
Absolutely. I don't think any Westerner wants to feed their kid durian. They don't even want to eat durian themselves.
Right. Okay. So what was the answer? Can you feed a kid durian?
Absolutely. You can feed a kid durian. You can eat durian every day of your pregnancy, but you have to be cautious of the sugar content.
Okay.
But if your baby's underweight, you can actually eat durian as many durian as you like.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But starting this out, you did have a background in journalism. Were there any difficulties that you faced in running an online media business by yourself at the time?
Yeah, so I think one of the good things about starting a company when you're very young is you don't know any better.
Okay, and how old were you at this time?
So I was 25.
Okay, oh wow, damn, I should be doing more with my life right now. But okay, so why do you say that? Why do you say that, being young, you can kind of do all these things?
So I think the good thing about when you're young is the opportunity cost is not as high as when you're older.
Okay.
When you're in your late 30s or in your 40s and you want to start a company, there's a lot of other things that you have to take into consideration, such as your lifestyle, the fact that, you probably are married, you have children, you have aging parents that you need to take care of. I think when you're in your 20s, the world is your oyster.
Right.
And people should be doing much more with their lives in their 20s because ultimately, life catches up with you in your 30s and 40s, especially for women, because that's our reproductive age.
Okay, so you're saying that the kind of difficulties that you faced in the early days of the Asian Parent were not so significant because you were younger back then?
That's right. So, I could afford to not take a salary for the first 3 years.
Right.
I could afford to, really bootstrap. And, I remember whenever I would come home to Singapore, I would definitely be living with mom and dad. And my first office was out of my mom's bedroom.
Oh.
A HDB 5-room flat, and I converted my bedroom into the office, and I would have my first team of interns who were all writers come into to my bedroom every morning at 9 a.m. And when my parents were out of the house, and mom would come back and she would make omelet sandwiches and food for us to eat during lunch.
Wow.
So you can afford to do that in your 20s.
Right. I'm sure once the business grew, there were challenges that even as a person in their 20s, you would have some difficulties tackling. When did you come into facing these challenges?
I think there are challenges always, right? From day one. The initial challenge usually is there a good product market fit?
Right.
So I've always said that running a company is like trying to build a very sturdy stool. In the initial days, it's not very sexy, but you need it, right? It's a stool and you want it to be solid, you want it to be stable. But you have 3 different legs that's so important. And the first leg is really market. If you don't have a market, a big enough market, then you're only going to have to rely on those 2 other legs, which is going to make the stool very wobbly.
Right.
So the second leg of your stool is product. If the product's not good, but you have market, you're still missing something. And then the third ingredient would be people.
Okay.
So if you have these 3 things, you can have a very sturdy stool, which you can then design and develop into being a very beautiful chair. But if you don't have these 3 things, you can't have a solid company.
Right. Okay. Now, you handled a lot of this by yourself, but when did you build a team that was beyond interns coming into your bedroom?
So I think that was around within the first 6 months or so.
Okay.
It was very clear to me that this was a viable business model. So I didn't have a lot of audience, but we were able to monetize very quickly right from the beginning.
Okay.
So because of that, we moved out. We got a small little office. This is going down memory lane for me. And we had our first few people join.
You mentioned that you monetized really quickly in the early days. What was your monetization strategy when you kind of started out?
So this is, again, really funny. So in the first 6 months to a year, I was still living in New York when I had the Asian Parent. And so I would fly back, which was why it was out of my mom's bedroom apartment.
Right.
And because I didn't have my own place here in Singapore in the early days. And I was living in New York and I called up one of the big CPG companies. And I said, hi, I've got this website called The Asian Parent. It has a lot of users from Singapore because I was very familiar with Singapore. And, would you like to learn more about my company? Can we do some partnerships? Can you advertise with me? And so the person on the phone said, sure, can you send me your media kit and rate card? So I was like, sure, of course. So I wrote it down, media kit and rate card. I had no idea what it was.
You had no media kit, no rate card.
No, I didn't have a media kit or rate card. I was never from a sales background. I was a journalist.
Right.
So I had never seen a media kit or rate card myself.
Okay.
So I kept on the phone and I remember Googling what's a media kit, what's a rate card. And then I called up my biggest competitor in the US and I pretended to be a child nail manicurist.
Oh, wow.
And I said, could you please send me your media kit and rate card? And so I took that media kit and rate card and then I went to Elance, which at that point was like my favorite place to hire people. And I said, okay, this is what a media kit and rate card looks. Now their color is this color, but Asians love red. So can you ape the whole thing and put in Asian photos and make it red? And then I started changing the text to Asian Parent, Asian Parent, Asian Parent. and then PDF'd it and sent it across. So that was my first media kit and rate card, and we closed that first deal.
Wow. So you actually closed that first deal.
We did.
Okay. So was that very quick, rapid growth, I guess, because of the very fast monetization that you experienced with the Asian Parent in the early days? You started expanding into several markets. You started with Singapore and then you went into Malaysia. Is that right?
That's right.
And how did that expansion go?
It was terrible. So very early on, right? So I realized, oh my gosh, we don't have a big enough market in Singapore for this business. So let's go into Malaysia because, hey, we share a border. So it must be really, really similar.
Right.
So I had visited KL quite a few times and I felt that it was quite like Singapore, very cosmopolitan. You were made up of the three races, Malay, Indians, Chinese. We eat the same type of food. We would fight over who invented nasi lemak. So kind of like very similar, right? Oh my God, boy, was I wrong.
Really?
Yeah, so that was the biggest learning curve of my life and also one of my biggest failures.
Okay.
So we expanded into Malaysia and I thought I would just take the Singapore strategy and export it to Malaysia and it would be a slam dunk success. And boy, was I wrong.
Okay.
So one of the big problems that we did in Malaysia was our content was in English.
Right.
And we produced English content. We copied the same exact philosophy. And we failed. We failed dramatically. And after about a year and a half of trying, I had to shut down the business.
Okay. Was it that bad? Like, was it just burning money trying to enter into Malaysia that you had to close down the business?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a wrong strategy. Even with regards to hiring of a team, I think at that point in time, I was trying to work with the team the same way I was working with the Singapore team. But Malaysians are very different from Singaporeans. What motivates them and what motivates the Singaporeans also very different.
Right.
Malaysia was a great learning opportunity and my first experience with real failure with the business.
Right. And did that kind of stop your move into different markets after that?
So the good thing was that this was pre-VC funding for us.
Still bootstrap.
So still bootstrapped.
Right.
So you go back home with your tail between your legs and say, oh my God, I totally failed here. And that forced me to really introspect and figure out, do we just want to be a Singapore-only company, but go into more verticals and more niches besides just mom? Or do we want to try going again into this global expansion of just the parenting domain? So we tried a little bit of both. We experimented with a lot of things and then said, okay, let's do one more shot. But this time around, let's go to Thailand.
Right.
And let's expand into Thailand and see if we're able to do a good job there.
Mm-hmm.
And within 6 months, it was crazy. Thailand was doing amazing. We had so much traffic. We had so many users. And we built a great team. I had taken a lot of my learnings and I spent a lot of time in Thailand. So the one thing is that every time I open up a new market, I try to spend at least 6 months personally, physically there,
right,
which would mean like a Monday to Thursday. So I had done that with Malaysia and had learned a lot about that. And then I did that with Thailand as well. And Thailand now is our second largest market and it's been amazing.
So aside from that, you staying in Thailand for a while before operating in Thailand as well, what did you do differently in the expansion into Thailand versus the attempted expansion into Malaysia?
So I think with Thailand, even though we're part of ASEAN, we're very different from each other. So you really need to meet with a lot of users and understand what is their need. And when we realized who was our target audience and we really understood our target audience, it was easy to then scale up.
So it's basically key to understand an audience before you start capturing them and giving them your product, which essentially was content. Right?
Correct. At that point, yes. And it's the same way now with our app strategy as well. It's really about understanding your audience. What is it that they want? When we do user research right now, one of the few key insights that we've learned recently, the first is that when we look at our app audience behavior, and in the last 9 months, we've had about 2.5 million installs of our app. In terms of Singapore, a lot of our Singaporean users come in and they use the app and they search.
Right.
So they don't ask a question, they don't do an answer, they don't go and read content, they come in straight away and they do search. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a market like Thailand, the first thing she does is she goes and checks her pregnancy reader.
Right.
So she wants to read content about, hey, how's my baby developing? Whereas in Indonesia, the first thing she does is go to the community.
Right.
So it's really about understanding your different audience and say, how do they navigate? What is their culture? What's their belief system? And who in that target audience is really using you on a daily basis? Who would cry tomorrow if you don't exist?
Right.
And so in different markets, we realize, hey, in Thailand, it's a pregnant woman. Oh, in Singapore, it's a breastfeeding mom. Okay, in Indonesia, it's a second-time mom. So really understand your audience on a granular basis and granular level.
Right. And there's aspects to that aside from just like the content that you would put up on these markets, but as in the user experience as well. You mentioned earlier to me that there were different ways in which people perceive different, formats on the site that you kind of had to understand and go into very granular, small, tiny differences that made a big impact on how visitors to your site would perceive the Asian parent. Can you talk a little bit about some of these differences?
Sure. So through our user research interviews, we noticed two very glaring, obvious oversights on our part. So the first one was that across the different Southeast Asian markets, they really use different platforms to share content.
Right.
So for example, in Vietnam, they use Zalo a lot and they use Messenger a lot. So when you have your icon sharing tabs, you can't be having Facebook or you can't be having Pinterest or you can't be having Twitter as one of the icons or even YouTube.
Sure.
Really, the first one that should be there is Zalo.
Right.
And if in the Philippines, you should be having Viber.
Right.
And in Thailand, Line should be there prominently. So it's so important for you to also have a Line account if you're operating in Thailand. I think a lot of times we use the same type of, sharing buttons. We use the same type of infrastructure, the same type of UX according to the different markets instead of going super hyper local. So that was one of the first insights that we learned that, oh my God, every different Southeast Asian market was using a different social network.
Right.
The second big insight we had was that outside of Singapore, most people didn't know that a menu bar was a menu bar.
Okay.
So, the hamburger menu bar that you usually see in mobile websites.
Yeah, like a three-line
the
kind of
three-line
thing. Yeah.
A lot of users in Southeast Asia, women users, specifically moms. Again, it's wrong for me to say users in general, but I would say our moms, which we have quite a lot of moms because we have 30 million users.
Right.
We realized that outside of Singapore, most of them did not know that was the hamburger menu bar. So they were very used to having navigation straight on your homepage itself. So lots of links and lots of different icons, very similar to how the super apps look, whether it's Grab, Gojek, Traveloka, or Carousel.
Right. So straight up all your services in kind of icons on the front page.
Exactly.
Rather than having to click somewhere.
So they rather go back to home and look for the icons and go to the categories that they want versus looking for a menu bar.
Right. Okay. And did these also change from city to city in the same country?
No, we didn't notice that. And we did interview a lot of users. So for example, in Indonesia, we interviewed users from Surabaya, Medan, Bandung, and Jakarta.
Right.
But we didn't see very core differences between the four major cities of Indonesia.
Okay. And you mentioned that this is something that's kind of unique to Southeast Asia, where kind of you don't have to just target one city. You target multiple cities. You don't look at it as countries that you're conquering, but cities that you're conquering.
That's right. It's very similar in India as well.
Okay. So how does this inform your different strategies when you're operating in these different markets?
So one of the things is, of course, the use of language.
Right.
So for example, in Vietnam and Hanoi, they have different types of slangs that they use for the same exact description of words.
Right.
And so if a person is reading this and it's written using a certain slang, they're like, oh, this is for Ho Chi Minh people.
Oh.
And the same way for Bandung, the people who live there speak a slightly different bahasa. So you can't just say that, oh, we're going with one language. And the same way for Philippines, while most people speak Tagalog, they also have so many other languages like Bisaya and Cebuano and stuff like that.
Right. And do you cater to all of these different dialects within the different markets?
Yeah, we actually do. So for a lot of different markets, we actually have a citywide edition, or we have local languages that go beyond just the main national language.
Right. And that's a lot of work to do. Is it a lot of work to do?
That is a lot of work to do.
So how do you manage this?
So I think the way we look at it is that for the Asian Parent, and once you download the app, you'll see that it's a mixture of PGC content and UGC content.
Okay.
PGC is what we call professionally generated content. So that's a library of content that is used across every market. About 70% of that content is the same, but it's translated for other different local versions. And 30% is created locally for that country. based on your religion, based on, your customs of your market. But whether you're in Philippines or whether you're in New York, the way you potty train a child is going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
So those kinds of content are just translated.
Well, that's good to know that it's the same.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's really 70% again is very much can be used across different markets. 30% that's local, but that's PGC content.
Right.
The second part of it is UGC content, which is basically let the users create as much content as they want. So for example, on our end, we have about 500,000 ultrasound photos being shared on our app every month.
Oh, wow.
And that's all UGC content.
Okay, and a lot of people interact with each other.
Absolutely, because it's a safe environment with other moms and other dads, and
Right.
we understand each other. We've gone through the same exact thing. So when I see a mom share her ultrasound photo, I feel so excited for her, and I actually do look at the photo and I go, oh, that's definitely a boy, or that's a girl, or look at that development, etc.
Right. So it's kind of building a community.
It is building a community
Beyond just like information and content. Right?
Absolutely. I think parenting is one of the most disruptive and beautiful things that happens to anyone's life. And
Right.
it changes you completely. And especially when you go into the pregnancy mode, it's literally you pee on a stick and suddenly you find out, oh my God, I'm going to be a mom or a dad. And a lot of times people are not prepared for this journey. And it changes you fundamentally as a human being. And you want to speak to other people who have gone through what you're experiencing at that moment.
Right. Right. Now, speaking of changes, like fundamental changes to you, maybe not on the same level as having a child, but you did have an experience in which you went on your first holiday a little earlier than your expansion into Malaysia, I guess.
That's right.
And you went on your first holiday after starting The Asian Parent, and your team just resigned on you.
Yes, this is again going back to memory lane.
How did that feel at the time?
It's like a mixture of different emotions, right? So the first thing that you feel is that it's not me, it's them.
Okay.
And then it's like the stages of grief, right? So it's first denial, like this is not happening to me, and it cannot be me. And then after that, it goes into acceptance and it goes into introspection, and you ask yourself, like, what am I doing that's repelling people? And because my notion of starting this business was not financial greed, and I think this is something about female founders. Whenever we do things, we want to have something that's a lot more than just trying to build a unicorn.
Right.
It's not about ARPU or GMV or how many users you have. It's really about what's the purpose and what impact am I bringing? So a lot of women are very attracted to impact investments, for example. So the same way for me, I started this company because I genuinely want to help the lives of Asian families. I want to have them go through happy, healthy, confident pregnancies and to raise happy, healthy, confident kids.
Right.
And so I didn't understand why all of these people were not as motivated by that cause as myself. And more importantly, if they were so motivated by this cause, then however I act as a boss or a leader shouldn't have affected them, right? Because it's inconsequential the way I behave, because the bigger purpose was the mission and the cause. But then I realized that that's not true. When you're working in an environment and you're spending 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of your life, of your day, you want to be working in a place where you feel accepted, you
Right.
don't feel judged, and you feel appreciated. And I think in the early days, I was just so stretched and so stressed that I didn't bother to slow down and notice what was the contributions that everyone else around me was also doing to push us further along on this goal. But I just took it that, hey, everyone knows what the mission is, so I don't need to mollycoddle you. So basically, I was being an Asian parent.
So you became an Asian parent while running The Asian Parent.
Exactly. I was like the mom with the cane, right?
Right.
Like, oh, you don't do this, I wrote on you. Like, why must I tell you I love you? You should already know.
Right. So, but what exactly were you doing that actually drove them away? Because it wasn't just one person, two people. It was was it a coordinated effort to just leave the company while
I'm
you were
guessing,
away?
yeah, definitely. I'm sure it was. I mean, because I was literally on vacation. It was the first vacation I had taken. And then to come back to an empty office was definitely very humiliating, as well as, just very grounding.
Right.
So I'm really glad for all of these obstacles and setbacks, but I think it's got to do with the fact that I am, and going back to the durian philosophy, right? I can be like a durian lah. I'm thorny on the outside and damn soft and sweet on the inside, but you
Right.
really need to be able to tahan and like open up the husk before you realize, hey, she's not that bad after all.
Yeah.
So I think I'm very curt, I'm very direct, and that doesn't necessarily work in Asia. So I think, generally speaking, now since I've worked across all the different markets, I think people prefer leaders, mentors, and managers who are less direct and more politically correct.
Right.
And I'm not the most politically correct person.
Okay. Were these the kind of feedback that they gave you when they left?
Definitely.
Okay.
So, and also, again, I was like an Asian parent, right? Where I don't say thank you enough, and I don't say good job, or I don't say, hey, I'm proud of you. I go, you can do better. Why you got B? Better get A next time, okay?
Why is it a 99? It should have been 100.
Yeah. So
right?
now what I do is so it's very hard to change who you are fundamentally as a person. So that doesn't mean that I've changed my style. Now I just hire people who can deal with that style.
Right. So it's not so much, changing who you are to appease other people, but being the best that you can and finding people who can be the best with what you are.
That's right. So I think I did also, I introspected a lot, and I realized there were certain qualities of myself that I needed to get rid of.
Right.
Like being quick-tempered and stuff like that. I needed, and I think with age, that's definitely mellowed down. And after having a child as well, because you can't be screaming at a 2-year-old kid or a 3-year-old kid, right? And they're going to constantly be pushing your buttons.
Right.
So you just learn strategies on how not to lose your cool. And I'm definitely someone who doesn't believe in any type of corporal punishment, nor do I believe in shouting and screaming at my daughter.
Yes.
So I've learned a lot of techniques and tactics to not lose my cool. But I think more fundamentally, when I hire people and people who are working very closely with me, I explain to them that I am direct to a fault. If I don't like something, I'm going to tell you I don't like it because I want us to all learn and just get better. And if you don't like direct, and if you're looking for mollycoddling, and if you're looking for someone who's going to be a helicopter and micromanage you, I'm also not that person.
Right.
So this is the kind of manager I am. Now, do you want to work with someone like me? And if you don't, there are other people in my team who might be better suited to work with you, but you cannot be part of my core team.
Okay. So did that change in, I guess, the strategy of finding people to join your team improve your corporate culture, your office culture at the Asian Parent and Tickled Media immediately? Or was it something that you had to learn along the way, step by step?
You have to learn along the way. And I guess the other thing for us is we're about 250 people spread out across 7 markets, which means that each of those 7 markets also need a different type of leader and a different type of manager.
Right.
So I would say that the team that I work best with is our team in Mumbai, because they're all engineers. So they also prefer when people are direct with them, and they are also very, very structured.
Yeah.
And I love product. So I just work best with them because of the fact that I think we kind of get each other. And then for some of the other markets, like if it's a more sales organization, then of course your behavior has to be slightly different.
Yeah. Okay. So in this kind of endeavor to find people that fit you and your business, as opposed to just changing yourself, you must have gone through a lot of hiring processes.
Yeah.
What kind of insights do you have into how people can find good talent to fit the roles that they need in their businesses? Because you did mention that's something that a lot of founders find is a pretty significant challenge in scaling a business, particularly, right? So what kind of insights do you have in your experience having to look for these people?
I think you can't teach a fish how to climb a tree.
Okay.
You just need to go to where all the fish are and start fishing in that pond. So, for example, there are certain stereotypes. So there are certain things that we know, right? So in Singapore, we are mostly good at math.
Okay.
It's been drilled often enough to us from primary school. You have to do multiplication, addition, subtraction, algebra, etc. And so a lot of us are, generally pretty good at math. And we
Right.
score really high in the PISA score with regards to maths and science. So with regards for us, we keep our finance team in Singapore. And so this is even finance for all the different markets is centralized out of Singapore.
Right.
And the same way for legal. And then in terms of Indonesia, Indonesians are very, very creative. And they have some of the most beautiful designs I've ever seen in my life. So we keep graphics design out of Indonesia. At the same time, we look for good UI and good UX. And we realize that Southeast Asia follows very closely to China's behavior in user experience. So we keep a lot of our product people out of Hong Kong.
Okay.
And then in terms of Filipinos are very expressive. They're very good at communication. So we keep centralized a lot of content out of Philippines. And then India, great at technology, great at engineering. So we keep engineering out of India. So it's really about creating hubs where the talent lies.
Right.
And then the second thing is, there's this beautiful quote, and I resonate so much with it, which is talent can't be taught, but it can be awakened.
Wow. Okay.
So how do you inspire people? How do you get them to become best versions of themselves? So how do you get people to spend their weekend and, go into Coursera and do extra courses and make themselves the best version of themselves?
Right.
And I think that's a lot to do with giving them a purpose and making sure that you communicate the purpose over and over again, and also show them the positive impact of them making themselves better in the terms of promotion, in the terms of recognition, etc.
Okay, so kind of making them make themselves the best person that they can be.
That's right.
Okay, and how do you personally inspire these people to be the best version of themselves?
So I think it's a few things. One of the things we do is this thing called Lunch and Learns, where in a lot of different offices, we invite external people to come in and have lunch with our team and share about what they know best. And or for example, we had someone who came in and shared about how taking ESOP made him a millionaire.
Wow.
And suddenly everyone realized, oh my God, this is the value of ESOP. Like, why do I keep fighting for more salary when I should in fact be fighting for more stake in the company?
Right.
And so I really think it's about bringing in key people into the team, inspiring them. So I use my Rolodex of contacts a lot. When every country I go into, I'll go into LinkedIn, see who do I know? Is this person cool? How do I convince them to come into my team and actually share with my team and awaken them?
Right. And do you do the same for other people? Like, do you come to other people's offices kind of share?
All the time.
Okay. So that's pretty interesting. Knowledge sharing within the industry to help grow each other's teams.
Absolutely. I think founders have to help each other out. We're in this market together. We're all trying to make the world a better place, as cliche as that sounds. So why do we keep competing with each other? Let's grow the pie.
Right. Growing the pie as a collective, inspiring innovation rather than stomping it down.
That's right.
Right. And now you, this year, actually, because you founded theAsianparent in 2009, this is your 10th year as a founder.
Yeah, tell me about it. Now everyone knows how old I am.
So with 10 years of being a founder, what were the key lessons that you picked up along the way?
So I think the first thing is Southeast Asia as a market is very different from China and the US. And one of the key difference is that an exit here takes a lot longer than in China or the US. In China, the typical IPO time horizon is somewhere between 3 to 5 years. So they can afford to work 996 because they only need to do it for 3 to 5 years, and the team only needs to do it for 3 to 5 years.
Right.
In the US, a typical IPO horizon timeframe is around 4 to 7 years. Whereas in Southeast Asia, it's like 9 years to 15 years. Companies like Razer, companies like even Gojek themselves are a lot older than what people think they are.
Yeah.
So it takes 3 times longer to have an exit in Southeast Asia versus China or the US. So you need to have resilience, you need to have tenacity, and slowing down is not allowed.
Right.
which also means that in that 10 to 15 years, you're if you start a company at 25, you're probably going to only exit the company somewhere when you're 35 to 45.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things happen in that 10 years. A lot of things happen in that 20 years.
For sure.
So it's a marathon, not a sprint. So let's all try to build businesses that can last for a long time and make sure we keep ourselves healthy, emotionally healthy, physically healthy, because it's a long marathon.
Right. And, you mentioned this. Does that mean that you at Tickled Media, at The Asian Parent, are looking for an exit right now?
No, we're not looking for an exit. But at some point, of course, because we've taken VC money, so our VCs will expect an exit.
Yeah.
So we will need to make sure that they can get the exit that they need. Whereas for myself, I intend to run this for the next 100 years or however long I live.
Well, 100 years of The Asian Parent, we'll get back to that on the future season, hopefully.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, for taking the time to share your insights on your journey. Before you leave, we actually did a little thing where we posted an Instagram story earlier today, asking our listeners, our audience, what they wanted to know about Tickled Media. So now that you're here with us, let's go through some of the questions and see what you have to say to all of our listeners and readers. So the first question: do you have any plans to move into EU or US? And would there be a change of name?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we want to go after is world domination, right? Global domination. So it's not just Southeast Asia. Most recently, we expanded into the African continent by going into Nigeria and going into Kenya.
Okay.
We've also just recently entered into Australia as well. Mm-hmm. So we are going beyond just emerging markets. And it's about, again, taking the same philosophy and making sure that you have local content, local community that resonates with the local audience. And you have to change the brand name.
Right.
So for Asia, we're Asian Parent. For the Indian subcontinent, we're called Indus Parent.
Okay.
For Africa, we're called the African Parent.
Right.
And for Australia, we're called the Aussie Parent.
Okay. Next question. Actually, you mentioned the African market. The next question is challenges with moving into African market.
Actually, it's very similar to Southeast Asia, right? It's made up of so many different countries who speak different languages, practice different religions, have different customs.
Right.
So I think for all of us here in Asia, the way we hate it when people just call us Asian, we're like, dude, we're not Asian. We're Thais, we're Singaporeans, we're Malaysians, we're Indians. The same way for us, we should also respect the African culture by not just saying they're Africans. There's so many different countries that make up Africa, which also means there's different languages, different religions, and we need to respect that. So I don't think that there's challenges, but it's about a huge new learning curve because their culture is very strong. And it's, of course, very different from ours. Right.
Okay. Next question. There's a saying that female founders have a harder time getting funding. Thoughts? I know you hate this question, but what are your thoughts on the saying that female founders have a hard time getting funding?
I agree. In the earliest stage, it's very hard to get that first angel round check.
Okay.
I think once your business has proven to be a viable business model, then a lot of times VCs don't look at gender and they're quite agnostic to whether you're a guy, girl, or in between or whatever. They really don't care. They just want to make money. Mm-hmm. So I think for later stage companies and companies our stage and later, it really doesn't matter if I'm a woman or not a woman. In fact, in my industry, it's actually a benefit to be a woman because I really understand my audience. I am my target market.
Sure.
And they like that and they trust that.
Yeah.
But I think in the early days, it is very difficult. I think women have to try 3 times harder than a guy in order to close that same deal. Mm-hmm. And so what we really need to have is more women angel investors. We really need to educate male angel investors and early stage seed investors about the women industry. And they just need to stop using the same lenses that they use for deciding whether a guy is a good investment. Stop using those same lenses when looking at women.
Okay. So last question that we have from our IG stories. Do you think the niche of focusing on Asian parents led to the Asian parents' success?
Absolutely. So the thing is that I think I found a niche that was small, but not so small. Mm-hmm. So the market size was very, very viable.
Right.
And it was an untapped market. It was a great opportunity. And more importantly, that I decided to focus on parents and moms instead of focusing on women in general, mm-hmm. because I recognized very early on, even though I was not a mom, that, oh my God, this whole pregnancy and parenting thing is kind of like life-changing. Yeah. So, it deserves to have a platform of its own to really talk about the challenges that you're going to experience when you're a parent.
Right. Okay, well, thank you so much for answering these questions. I hope that our listeners, our readers are satisfied with your answers. If not, there's always the next season to look forward to where you'll join us and answer some more questions. But that's all the time that we have for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me, Roshni.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and so for anyone interested to know more about Tickled Media, they can visit tickledmedia.com. For anyone wondering if you can feed a toddler durian or any similar questions, you can always visit theAsianparent.com. Do you want to give a shout out to any of your social media, any of your apps?
No, I just want to say I really, really hope to see more fathers involved in parenting, and dads specifically. Please download our app. It will be the best app you've ever downloaded because it's got to do with your baby, your child.
Right. So with a life-changing experience, you need a life-changing app to accompany it.
Exactly.
Right? Well,
I'm going to use that line going forward.
You're welcome. So until our next episode, that's the podcast. Thank you to all our listeners for listening. Thanks again to Roshni for joining me today. And a big thanks as well to our sponsor, HR Easily, for sponsoring this podcast. They've sponsored 4 episodes at this point, and they've got a great product that helps businesses manage their human resources. So check them out at hreasily.com. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us wherever you're listening from. We're uploading episodes every other week, and we've got a great lineup of guests whose stories I'm very excited to share with all of you. All our episodes are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also find episodes on the Tech in Asia webpage at techinasia.com/tag/startup-snapshot. If you want to reach us for any reason, you can just drop us an email at podcast@techinasia.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions for Roshni, and we'll be happy to send the message across. Thanks again for tuning in to Startup Snapshot. My name's Nat. Goodbye.